The first time I saw her, the entire ballroom turned away. Not because she wasn't beautiful, but because people didn't know how to look at her without staring. The lights inside the Grand Regent Hotel in Chicago shimmered like fallen stars, reflecting off crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors. The annual Valentine Foundation Gala was the most powerful charity event in Illinois, hosted by tech billionaire Marcus Valentine. Politicians, investors, celebrities, they were all there. And I was just Ethan Caldwell, a junior events coordinator who had begged for this job after my father's construction accident left our family drowning in debt. Then she stepped into the room. Scarlet Valentine, the CEO's only daughter. A long silver gown hugged her figure gracefully, but the left side of her face bore deep burn scars, twisting gently along her cheek and temple like a cruel memory that refused to fade. The whisper started immediately. Not cruel enough to be heard clearly, but sharp enough to cut. If you believe in kindness and second chances in seeing people for who they truly are, take a second right now to like this video, comment where you're watching from, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel. Because stories like this deserve to be felt, not just heard. I wasn't supposed to be on the ballroom floor. My job was behind the scenes, checking lighting cues, coordinating wait staff, ensuring everything ran perfectly. But when the band announced a formal dance segment and couples began pairing off, I saw something that made my chest tighten. Scarlet stood alone. Not one man approached her. Not one. Some pretended to adjust their watches. Others suddenly became fascinated with their champagne glasses. Even the men who moments earlier had been boasting about their bravery and business battles couldn't muster the courage to cross the floor. I didn't know her story yet. I didn't know how she got those scars. All I knew was the look in her eyes. Not anger, not bitterness, but exhaustion. The exhaustion of being avoided. My supervisor, Graham Foster, hissed at me from the sidelines to keep moving. But something inside me refused. I crossed the ballroom. Every step felt louder than the music. I was acutely aware of who she was. The daughter of a man who could end my career with a single phone call. But I was also aware of who she wasn't in that moment. She wasn't the CEO's daughter. She was just a woman standing alone. When I reached her, I bowed slightly, extended my hand, and asked her to dance. The room froze. Scarlet blinked at me, surprised. Her unscarred eyes shimmered under the chandelier light. For a heartbeat, I thought she might refuse out of habit. Instead, she placed her hand in mine. Her fingers were warm, trembling just slightly. As we stepped onto the dance floor, I could feel hundreds of eyes digging into us. I wasn't a polished dancer like the executives gliding nearby. I was stiff, nervous, but I kept my focus on her, not her scars, but her smiles slowly forming as we moved in rhythm. Up close, I could see the faint outline of graft lines near her jaw. They didn't frighten me. They told a story of survival. The music softened, and so did she. Her shoulders, tense at first, began to relax. The tension in her hand eased. She looked up at me with something fragile and almost disbelieving. For those few minutes, the whispers stopped mattering. The ballroom faded. There was only the quiet rhythm of two strangers moving through a sea of judgment. Halfway through the song, I noticed Marcus Valentine watching from the balcony above. His expression wasn't anger. It was something more complicated, protective, assessing. I suddenly understood the weight of what I was doing. Scarlet wasn't just any woman. She had survived something terrible. Later, I would learn that 3 years earlier, she had pulled a child out of a burning car after a highway collision outside Milwaukee. The explosion had left her scarred, but the child survived without a scratch. The media had praised her for weeks until the headlines moved on, and only her scars remained. The music slowed to its final notes. As the song ended, Scarlet didn't pull away immediately. Her hand tightened slightly like she was memorizing the moment. Then she said something I will carry for the rest of my life. She told me she wouldn't forget me. Not because I danced well, not because I was charming, but because I didn't look away. Applause rippled through the room, polite, uncertain. But something had shifted. A few guests began approaching Scarlet afterward, conversations cautiously forming. The ice had cracked. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The next morning, I was called into Marcus Valentine's office on the 47th floor of the Valentine Technologies headquarters overlooking Lake Michigan. My stomach twisted the entire elevator ride. I expected to be fired for overstepping my place. Instead, Marcus studied me quietly from behind his glass desk. He asked why I had done it. I told him the truth. I said, "No one deserves to stand alone like that." He didn't respond immediately. Then he told me something that shook me. Scarlet hadn't attended a public event in nearly a year. She had refused therapy, refused interviews, refused almost everything. But last night after the gala, she had asked about me. That conversation changed the direction of my life. Marcus offered me a position, not because I impressed him professionally, but because his daughter had smiled for the first time in months. I became part of the Valentine Foundation's outreach team, helping coordinate hospital visits for burn survivors and organizing scholarships for first responders' families. Scarlet began attending meetings quietly at first, standing beside me during events, slowly reclaiming the spaces she had abandoned. The first time she spoke publicly again was at a children's hospital in Detroit. Her voice trembled as she removed the silk scarf she sometimes wore and showed her scars openly to a room full of young patients. She told them survival was nothing to hide. I stood off stage, heart pounding with pride. But growth isn't linear. There were setbacks. Online trolls resurfaced old photos. Investors questioned whether her public presence might affect brand optics. I watched her read those comments in silence one night after a board dinner. The old exhaustion flickered in her eyes again. I reminded her of the ballroom, of the moment she chose to step forward instead of retreat. Months turned into a year. The foundation's donations doubled. Burn survivor programs expanded across Illinois and Michigan. More importantly, Scarlet began walking into rooms without flinching. And somewhere in between hospital corridors and late-night strategy meetings, our connection deepened into something neither of us had planned, but both of us needed. One evening, we returned to the same Grand Regent Hotel ballroom for the annual gala. This time, Scarlet insisted on no special announcements, no staged hero narratives, just authenticity. When the band began to play, she turned to me first. There were no whispers. Now, we stepped onto the floor as equals. As we danced, she leaned closer and told me she had once believed her life ended in that fire, that beauty, love, and belonging were things she no longer qualified for. She said, "The night I crossed that ballroom wasn't about romance. It was about dignity." She told me I gave her that back. If this story has touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who believes they're not enough, and subscribe so we can keep telling stories that matter. And before we finish, I have one special request. Comment the word "seen" if you believe every scar tells a story of strength. Because here's what I learned that night in Chicago. Courage isn't always running into a burning car. Sometimes it's walking across a quiet ballroom when everyone else chooses comfort. Scarlet once told me she wouldn't forget me. The truth is I will never forget her either. Not for the scars, but for the way she taught an entire room and a man like me that the bravest thing you can do is let yourself be seen.